Regulars to this channel will likely be very aware that I have been a big fan of speakers designed by Peter Como of Wharfedale, Mission and Quad. And so much so I have here for my own reference and testing purposes the Wharfedale Evo 4.2 and Mission 770. I own both of those speakers, but I also have here the Mission 700s, and I've listened to a lot and liked a lot the Wharfedale Linton and the Wharfedale Dovedale. So from all of that listening experience, it's no small thing to sit here and say that I think the Elysian 3, Wharfedale Elysian 3 that you can see there behind me are my favourite speakers of the bunch. And that is because they're actually nothing like what I was expecting. They're actually like a wolf in sheep's clothing to some degree, because I was expecting a very relaxed, very easygoing type of sound, but that is not what they are. I actually think they are Wharfedale's firecracker speakers because they sound very lively and very dynamic and very, very clear, but still very much a Wharfedale. And then we have to think about speaker size, because I think often we as audiophiles associate bigger as always being better. And this question really becomes pertinent if you're trying to decide between the Wharfedale Elysian 4 or the new smaller Elysian 3, because there is not a huge price difference between them. With the Elysian 4, they cost £6,999 and the Elysian 3, £5,999. And don't get me wrong, £1,000 is still a lot of money. But I think if you're in a situation where you're buying your end game hi-fi speakers, which the Elysian could very much be, well then I think if it meant just saving up a bit longer to get that extra £1,000 to buy, if the bigger speaker was definitely the better speaker, well then it would be worth saving for longer, right, to get that money together. So it makes you question, why does the Elysian 3 exist? And Wharfedale told me it's not just, to fill a product gap in the lineup. It's actually based on demand. Customers were asking for an Elysian floor standard speaker that was smaller than the Elysian 4 for when the Elysian 4 is too big for the room. So the Elysian 3, and this is something to be mindful of, has been designed with smaller listening room use in mind. And if you're new to the Elysian range, this is Wharfedale's flagship or their best speakers. And I think the intent of them is to offer a sound quality that punches above their price point by compared to other speakers on the market, and do so in a high quality luxury package. Because it doesn't really matter, I think, if you're spending £5,000, £6,000, £7,000 or more, this is still a huge amount of money to spend on a pair of speakers. So I can't help but like that approach to, an attempt to still offer great value for money, even at very high price points, because it's not something that we see that often in very high-end audio. And the Elysian 3 are very compact speakers, not only for their height, but also their depth, which will make them more easy to accommodate in smaller rooms, again, as is their intended use case. And combined with rather nice styling, which is certainly unique, it should help them have more spouse acceptance factor. But that will of course depend on the spouse, as it always does. And the Elysian definitely look unique with their very chunky outrigger and spike design, and the fact that they appear to have two bottoms, or a bottom and a stand, because they are bottom slot ported. And this just looks very different. It's all very chunky, but I really like it. And I also can't help but be impressed with their general build quality. You can see the quality of the veneers that's used and just how many coats of lacquer have been applied, but how deep the finish is. And I personally like the big chunky speaker cable terminals, as they make screwing up to a spade nice and tight that much easier. And who doesn't like a big and chunky knob to play with? But back to being serious, the Elysian 3 feature the exact same mid-range driver and AMT or air motion tweeter as from the Elysian 4. And this combination sounds absolutely fantastic. And the AMT is likely to be considered the star of the show by many. And it was apparently 5 years of R&D to get it to this level. But I actually think it might be that 6-inch woven glass fiber mid-range driver that could be the star of the show here, because vocals, and especially the upper regions, the tops of vocals, are presented so clear, so crisp and clear but smooth and also with fantastic tone or timbre as well. So I find that combination super impressive because it's not like we're losing the important tone and timbre that I've become accustomed to with, other Wharfedale speakers and other maybe Mission speakers as well. That wonderful tone that you get, we don't lose that in favour of kind of more clarity and outright resolution. So the balance, the combination, the balance of the two is so well struck here that it's instant. You hear this about the Elysian straight away, and it's really impressive. It's one of their standout key strengths. But I can't not also sing the praises of the AMT because it again sounds very clear and precise without being clinical. And I really liked how precisely and easily I was hearing the upper layers in music. And I suppose it's just harmonic information at times with some music, but of course with other music it could be, real sounds such as maybe cymbals or similar, and definitely synth sounds in electronic music. And I don't think that really matters, but what matters more is just how your appreciation of the music kind of gets extended in height and gets extended in information and maybe spatial information as well. And I know this is something that audiophiles often class as like an airy type of sound, but I hate using that phrase. I don't think it really means anything. So what I'm going to say is instead, I'm going to say it's like complete. It sounds like a more complete picture or musical picture from a height, information, maybe atmosphere point of view, compared to, say, some soft dome tweeters and speakers. They just don't always seem to give you that extra height information, space and atmosphere information. But I will admit that at first I was finding the Elysian to be just a touch, just a smidgen too forward. And I think that is because of their energetic delivery in the upper regions. But they seem to smooth out with more playback, and as I found a better placement in my room for bass, and that created a much better balanced overall sounding speaker, still with a lot of energy, but more importantly with more refinement. But one thing that I've been particularly impressed with is the sibilance region, and that could just be the AMT itself, or maybe it's the combination of the AMT and that really impressive 6-inch mid-range driver, in which case it then becomes the crossover, because the sibilant sounds in music, I'm particularly sensitive to that. And with the Elysian 3, you could of course hear sibilance in music when it was there. You couldn't hear it when it wasn't there, which of course is important. But when it was there, when that sibilance was there, it was so well managed because you could hear it, but it wasn't over accentuated, but it wasn't smoothed over either. So it was like a nice combination of everything, just about the right balance of the information without it being over exaggerated, which is really impressive when you've got a very lively and dynamic and energetic overall sounding speaker that is still able to manage that critical region. Again, I'm ultra sensitive to that. So I found that really impressive. And things like that make a big difference when you're talking about long listening sessions, especially at louder volumes. And then the way the music gets out of the speakers, or really the way the speakers get out of the way to create a very wide open, clear window onto the music, is extremely impressive, especially with the space that was created between the speakers, which can sometimes become congested and mushy if the speakers are blooming the sound, and that's definitely more noticeable in a smaller room like what I have, but there was none of that here, and that has to be related to the cabinet design. And for me, the very obvious rectangle shape of the Elysian speakers with the curved edges is quite an unusual shape for a very high-end speaker, because we often see curved cabinets. But given the Elysian 3's ability to not only create sound stages with impressive depth, sound that very clearly goes beyond the speakers, but they also deliver a wide sound stage that can come right out into the room with you at times as well, with the right music and with the right quality of front end. So their overall soundstage capability is extremely impressive in what you might call a fully three-dimensional soundscape, behind the speakers, in front of the speakers, wide of the speakers. About as impressive as any other speaker I've had in here before. But, obviously I do have limitations of this smaller listening room. So the cabinet must be doing a very good job. Otherwise, the clarity of this imaging that I've just been talking about would be more obviously muddled or blurred some, and that's not the case at all. The Elysian 3 create a very clear, very wide open, very organized, very precise three-dimensional soundstage. And the cabinet is a multi-layer sandwich of different woods, of different densities, called PROS, P-R-O-S, Panel Resonance Optimization System, which is a fancy name for sure. But I do wonder if this is maybe where there is an advantage to a smaller speaker, like the Elysian 3 being a smaller speaker than the Elysian 4, because obviously all the panels then become smaller, and generally smaller panels means less natural resonance. When you have a speaker that wants to give you this much kind of liveliness, energy and dynamics and clarity, well then of course it becomes important to have the right amount of bass to balance that overall sound. And of course Peter Como knows how to design a speaker with a balanced overall sound, but I think it's important to think about here that we do have the exact same mid-range driver and AMT as from the larger Elysian 4 speakers, but of course the Elysian 3 is noticeably smaller, with dual 7-inch coated glass fiber bass drivers in a smaller cabinet, which of course is going to affect the bass output. And in my initial testing, I found the Elysian 3 bass to be exceptionally good for being tight, controlled and articulate, which is important because the bass needs to keep up with the very fast and energetic mids and highs, and it does, so that is of no concern here. I found the bass output and extension from the Elysian 3 to be very impressive for their physical size, because they are really quite a compact floor standing speaker. Yes, dual 7-inch bass drivers is impressive. However, cabinet volume, of course, has an effect on output and extension. So that part was impressive. But I think what impressed me more was the bass output to how tight and articulate the bass was ratio. Because often when a speaker or a subwoofer, delivers very tight bass, we can psychoacoustically, I think, perceive it as less, compared to maybe a speaker or a subwoofer that has a slightly bloomier or more fat type of bass delivery. And the Elysian 3 is very, very much about tight, fast, articulate bass. So when output comes into play, I think it's important to think about their intended design use case, which is for smaller rooms. I was told that. So maybe a placement close to a boundary would add more room gain, which boosts bass, right? That's something important, I think, to think about for their setup. But I don't really get a lot of that in this particular room, which is what the blue tape squares on the floor are all about. That's kind of about as neutral as I can get it. However, within that square, I can add just a little bit more room gain and just a little bit less. And I found that with a little bit more room gain added to the speakers for a bit more bass output, that was working better. But interestingly, with that aside, specific music examples, one of my favorite albums is Lady Blackbird Black Acid Soul, and in that it's got really big and quite a heavy bass, double bass throughout the whole album. And the Elysian 3 had absolutely no problem delivering that double bass with real big impact, real big scale, but still with, intricate details. That was super impressive. However, with other music like heavy electronic music or maybe drum and bass that I listened to, then I found that, I still probably would have preferred, subwoofers, just to add some more kind of room throb, more room warmth and more room kind of, feel that just that type of music really benefits from. So it's not a definite that you would need subwoofers with them, far from it. It always depends on lots of different factors. But for me in here, for my personal use case, I was happy listening without them, but I probably would have been happier listening with them. But you can kind of see the quality of the subs that I have there behind me. That definitely kind of plays into the equation. I think we should talk about amplifiers, because on paper the Elysian 3 seemed like a relatively easy speaker to drive, being a 4 ohm load with a sensitivity of 89 decibels and a power rating of up to 200 watts. But I was told that they do have some impedance dips, not too bad, not too much, but some impedance dips, which means you would need, a good amplifier with them. But good doesn't necessarily have to mean crazy expensive. I started out with the Audiolab 9000A, which is an excellent amplifier for its price, and a very good price, I think, compared to obviously the speaker's quality, and I was getting some very good results. But I'll be honest, very quickly, I definitely was missing the big Macintosh MA352 hybrid integrated amplifier that I had here recently, because its sound, it's very impressive. I really like that amplifier, but I think its character and sound would work really well with the Elysian 3. But I was also thinking back to my time with the, from a few years ago now, the Luxman L509X. That could be a great amplifier, or maybe the new 509Z or Z that's just been announced. I've got my eye on that. Hint, hint, Luxman. But I still have here the Galleon TS120 SE tube amplifier. And I actually thought this was a really good amplifier to use with the Elysian 3, because the Galleon has some power and balls for a tube amplifier, especially with the Shug UN tubes. With those tubes, it has a really quite bold sound, and I was really enjoying some added tube colour or character to the vocals, and this pairing I really enjoyed. But I ended up settling for the biggest gun system I had here, with a £30,000 digital stack from IDN Audio, the bespoke audio passive preamplifier, which costs around £18,000 because this is a silver version, and the NAD M23 power amplifier. And this setup gave me, I think, the best overall sound from the Elysian 3 in terms of soundstage and dynamics and combination of everything. So I think the moral of this story is you definitely want a good quality amplifier, but that doesn't necessarily have to cost you cajillions of pounds. But if you've already invested the money in really good amplification, or if you're considering it, well, then I think the Elysian 3 will thank you for it and show you the rewards of your investment. And the last thing we need to talk about is some kind of comparison, because I know some of you find this really useful. And I have here at the moment to review as well the CSS Typhon speakers, which are a similar-ish size and price to the Elysian 3. But what's interesting here is I think the CSS look like the more modern type of speaker, and yet it's the Elysian that has the more modern sound. But I need to be careful here with going into too much detail for this comparison, because I just need more time. I think the Typhons need more playtime, and I think I just need more time with them to, mess around with the different things. The fact you can adjust the top section of that, and I need to try a few different amplifiers. But I did listen to them straight for about 4 or so days. And it's interesting because they have a very big, very warm, very inviting overall sound with a lot of bass. And it's really a very, very different sound to the Elysian 3. And as I mentioned, the Typhons do sound very big, they sound very warm, which of course becomes very pleasing, and the bass adds a lot of warmth to their overall sound and really quite a lot of scale to some degree. But at the same time, they are not opening up the window onto the music with anything like the same clarity as the Elysian do. The overall soundstage, everything within it is all there, but at the moment at least, it's not nearly as clear or precise in presentation as from the Elysians. So for me, the Typhon are giving me more of a musical cuddle at the moment, which is nice, I like it, but their presentation is obviously much darker, and it's also more bloomed from top to bottom. So they sound much softer in the vocals. The vocals are very inviting and pull you in, but they don't have that same clarity, definition, focus and impact as from the Elysian. And the Typhon, they do give you more bass, definitely more bass kind of feel and presence within the room. So I think you're less likely to want to use a subwoofer with the Typhons than you are with the Elysian. So that's really interesting, because it comes back to that kind of music situation thing. When I listen to music like big drum and bass or some electronic music, having that extra bass is definitely better, or adds value, or what makes that music more impactful, maybe more pleasing. However, with other music like Lady Blackbird, where you've got big bass already and you need it to be as tight and as articulate as possible, well then I definitely favour the Elysian for that type of music. And despite this not being a perfect setup comparison, because I think the Typhon might just need more running time, I still found it to be a very useful comparison, as it shows really the differences between two different mid-range tweeter designs. And it showed me just how good the top section is from the Elysian, the mid-range and AMT, but also how a bit more bass from the Elysian wouldn't be the end of the world in my room. But I have got to say, as it stands, for what I've listened to and what I've heard between these two speakers, I definitely would take the Elysian 3, because I just preferred that clarity, I preferred that open window, I preferred the tight focus to everything with that lively, energetic, dynamic sound, because obviously adding more bass pressure to a system and warmth and that bottom end scale is of course much easier, because adding subwoofers these days, there's lots of really good subwoofers out there. So yeah, that bit's easier to feel than the clarity and organization. But again, I don't want to go too much into this comparison or take too much from it at this stage, because I think the Typhons might just need more running time. So just before I round up this review, are there any negatives to think about with the Elysian 3? Well, what's interesting is, of course, we have to consider personal preference, because you might want a more soft, easygoing, relaxed type of sound presentation, in which case maybe the Typhon would have more appeal. Or maybe within, Wharfedale's own camp, something like the Dovedale. Speakers like the Dovedale would have some appeal, because they'll give you the big, lively, energetic sound of the Elysian, but do so in a more soft and kind of more relaxed and easygoing fashion. That would be how I would define the two. And you could even, some of you might remember back to my raisins diagram. If you think about the differences I showed in that raisin diagram, I would describe that characteristic difference between the Elysian 3 and the Dovedale. That same kind of characteristics. Back then it was an Evo 4.2 versus Linton. So that same kind of difference applies here. The Elysian are about getting out of the way, creating soundstage space. But what's interesting about them, they do it with this really lively, dynamic, kind of clear, very clear sound. Impressive. But at the same time, maybe that comes over with a little bit of an edge. There is an edge to their sound. Maybe that little edge might be what makes you love them, or it also might be what makes you think they're not quite relaxed enough for you. So we are definitely into preference here and nitpicking here. I definitely noticed a bit of an edge to them, which I particularly really enjoyed. But I could also find that using a Galleon tube amplifier softened that edge just a little bit, and I found that really pleasing. So these are the when you're buying high-end, very high-end, maybe end-game speakers, these are little things that you need to be mindful of. They're not really criticisms, they're like unique characters or characteristics. So yeah, the Elysian 3 have definitely got a little bit of an edge. And that makes me wonder whether the Elysian 4, the bigger speakers, also have that edge, or maybe because they're a bigger speaker, maybe they have a little bit of a softer presentation, or maybe they don't. I really don't know. But of course, I'm now keen to listen to them to find out. But at the same time, maybe I would miss that edge, the bit that I really enjoyed and liked about the Elysian 3. That is the funny, strange world, of personal preference of very high-end audio. So it's a pretty easy review conclusion for me. If you own Wharfedale speakers now, maybe from the Evo range or Linton or Denton, then so long as your room is not too large, you're not going to be disappointed in the build or the sound of the Elysian 3. I think they will be everything you hope they will be and more. And it's a very safe upgrade path for you. But just shy of £6,000 is a lot of money. And of course, a lot of money can buy you a lot of other lots of other different speakers. There's loads of speakers to choose from. So, I suppose, why would you choose the Wharfedale Elysian range or the Elysian 3 in particular? Well, probably because you like how they look and obviously, of course, the sound. But when I think about their maybe main big British competitors like Bowers & Wilkins, Kef and Monitor Audio, when I looked at their product ranges, when you look at their top products, for about the same price point as the Elysian 3, you would get a stand mount speaker and maybe a stand if you're lucky. So I think that becomes a big part of the deal here. The fact that Wharfedale are trying to give you more speaker at that price point, because we are talking very, very, very good quality speakers here, and it's just, I think, a bit of extra value coming from Wharfedale for what you get for your price. Just a bit of extra value there, which might be important to you. It's definitely something to take into account. So I hope you've enjoyed this review. I hope you found it useful and helpful. If you enjoyed it, please hit the thumbs up. And if you appreciate my take on hi-fi reviewing, then please subscribe to this channel.